The camera fades in on a quiet neighborhood in Cedar Falls, Iowa, the kind of place where porches sag a little under the weight of long winters and neighbors still wave when they pass each other on the sidewalk. It is late evening, the night before the wedding that the Lane family has been planning for months. Inside the Lane home, a heavy air hangs over the dining table. The clatter of silverware is faint, the tick of the kitchen clock unnervingly loud. Avery Lane, 29, sits at the end of the table, her posture rigid, shoulders stiff as if she has been bracing for this moment her entire life. Her brother, Cole Lane, the golden child, scrolls through his phone with the smug detachment of a man convinced the world owes him its best. His fiancée, Lindsay Carter, fiddles with her napkin, not daring to intervene. Their parents, Marcia and Richard, exchange loaded glances that speak more than words ever could. The conversation begins with a list of demands: lobster tails for the main course, vintage champagne shipped in from Napa Valley, and a celebrity photographer from Pittsburgh who once shot the governor's gala. Avery listens, fork frozen in her hand, her chest tightening as each new request piles atop months of sleepless nights and drained savings. She has already poured $10,000 of her own money into this wedding, cutting corners, haggling with vendors, and covering deposits from her meager savings. When she finally speaks, her voice is calm but firm. "I can't do that. I've already paid for the venue, the band, the flowers. There's nothing left." Cole doesn't even look up. "You're always cheap, Avery. This is my wedding. Make it happen." The words cut sharp, but it's their mother who delivers the final blow. Marcia sets down her wine glass with a deliberate thud, eyes narrowing as if her daughter is an obstacle rather than blood. "He's right. This is once in a lifetime." "Why are you being so selfish?" Richard glances up from his plate, voice gruff but decisive. "Don't ruin this for your brother." The silence that follows is suffocating. Avery feels the sting in her chest, the way betrayal burns hotter when it comes wrapped in family. She tries to remind herself, that she has given everything she could. But before the words form, Cole leans back in his chair, smirk tugging at his lips. "Maybe you shouldn't be involved at all." Marcia leans in, her voice cold, final, like a verdict handed down in court. "You know what, Avery? The greatest gift you can give your brother is to vanish from this family forever." The room goes still. Lindsay shifts uncomfortably, eyes darting to her lap. Richard doesn't flinch, just stares at the table as if the decision is already written. Avery's pulse hammers in her ears. For a split second, she thinks she might crumble, that her knees might give out under the weight of their rejection. But then something steadies inside her. A fire lit not from their approval but from the ashes of their scorn. She pushes back her chair, the scrape of wood on tile slicing through the silence. She doesn't cry. She doesn't plead. "Fine," she says, her voice low but steady, the words heavy with years of swallowed hurt. "If that's what you want." She grabs her purse, keys jingling like tiny cymbals in the quiet kitchen. As she walks out, the door closes behind her with a sharp finality, the sound like a full stop at the end of a chapter that never belonged to her anyway. Outside, the autumn night air is cold, but it feels like oxygen filling lungs that had been suffocating for too long. In Cedar Falls, where families gather in pews and gossip travels faster than the wind across cornfields, a daughter walking away from her brother's wedding is more than drama, it is scandal. Yet Avery doesn't care. In that moment, she realizes the power of leaving. Here's the question I leave to you. If you were standing at that table in Cedar Falls, Iowa, your family demanding you vanish as payment for years of sacrifice, would you stay to endure the humiliation, or would you walk out and let them face the chaos without you? Tell me how you would handle it in the comments. The story rewinds, peeling back the layers of Avery's life before that night in Cedar Falls. To understand the fire in her chest, you have to see what it cost her to be invisible. Years earlier, she had been on the brink of something big. At 26, Avery was freelancing as a marketing consultant, juggling small contracts out of a cramped apartment near downtown Des Moines. After years of hustling, drafting ad copy on the backs of receipts, sketching logos on coffee-stained napkins, she finally landed a contract that promised to change everything. A regional supermarket chain offered her $40,000 to revamp their entire advertising campaign. $40,000 wasn't just a paycheck, it was freedom. It meant paying off her student loans, moving into an apartment where the heat didn't sputter in mid-January, maybe even investing in her own agency. She was ready to sign the papers, the ink practically drying in her imagination, when the phone rang. It was her mother, Marcia, voice cracking with something Avery rarely heard. Desperation. The family's grocery store, a modest corner shop in Cedar Falls, was on the verge of collapse. Bills stacked on the kitchen counter, suppliers refusing to extend credit, customers trickling away to bigger box stores on the highway. Her father, Richard, stoic as ever, confessed over the line that they might lose everything. Avery held the phone, heart pounding, as the weight of generations pressed down. This wasn't just a store, it was the place where she'd done homework behind the cash register, where neighbors came in for milk and stayed to swap stories about weather and high school football. To lose it was to erase her family's name from the town's story. She could have chosen herself. She could have signed that contract, secured her future, let the store go under. Instead, she called the supermarket rep the next morning, voice steady even as her chest tightened. "I'm sorry," she said. "I can't take the deal." She hung up before the tears could spill. Avery threw herself into saving the family business with a ferocity that surprised even her. She crafted radio ads that ran on local stations, wrote flyers and hand-delivered them to every mailbox in town, and even dipped into early social media platforms that most locals barely understood. Her nights stretched into dawn, tweaking slogans, designing crude posters on outdated software, convincing herself that if she just worked harder, her parents would finally see her. And it worked. Slowly, then all at once, foot traffic doubled. The store's aisles buzzed again, the register drawers filling with cash that eased the worst of their debts. Suppliers who had once ignored Richard's calls began to return, intrigued by the sudden surge of customers. Avery negotiated with vendors, charmed customers with giveaways, and streamlined costs. She became the store's backbone, though no one said it out loud. Yet, recognition never came. When she walked into the store, sweaty from a morning of deliveries, Marcia barely glanced up from the counter. Richard would mutter about bills but never acknowledge that it was Avery's marketing that had pulled them back from the edge. Neighbors praised the store's revival, but her parents deflected the credit, mumbling about family effort or Cole's business sense, even though Cole was busy billing hours at his law firm states away. Avery told herself it was fine. Gratitude wasn't the point. What mattered was that she had saved them. What mattered was that maybe, finally, she would be seen as more than the backup daughter, the shadow. Late at night, she sat alone at her desk, red pen scratching across posters, whispering silent prayers that her sacrifice would earn her a nod, a smile, a touch of pride from the two people she wanted it from most. But those moments never came. Instead, her parents seemed to grow more enamored with Cole, holding up his law career as proof of the family's success. Avery's victories were reduced to silence, tucked behind their pride in the golden child. This is the quiet cruelty of invisibility, to give everything you have, to sacrifice your dreams, and to watch the people you saved look straight past you. In Cedar Falls, Avery's choice was seen as duty, not devotion. To her parents, she wasn't a savior. She was simply doing what was expected. A daughter paying her dues. The $40,000 contract slipped away, gone like smoke, and with it, a piece of Avery's independence. She convinced herself it was worth it, that one day her parents would see her not as Cole's shadow, not as the daughter who did okay, but as Avery Lane, the woman who had saved their legacy. That day never came. The store smelled of fresh bread and polished linoleum when Marcia and Richard called the family meeting. Avery thought, maybe. Finally, they'd acknowledge her work the late nights, the canceled contract, the way she had practically resuscitated the business with her bare hands. She pictured her mother's smile, her father's approving nod. Instead, what came felt like the cruelest sleight of hand. Marcia's voice was warm, almost rehearsed. "Your brother's going to take over, Avery. It's what's best for the family." Her eyes sparkled with pride, but not at Avery. They were fixed on Cole, who stood there adjusting his tie as though he were about to argue a case in front of a judge, not manage the corner store he had never lifted a finger for. Richard cleared his throat, avoiding her gaze. "He's a lawyer. He's got the head for this. You understand." "Understand?" Avery's throat went dry. She'd spent months digging them out of ruin, slashing costs, negotiating with vendors who wanted nothing to do with them, pulling customers in with radio ads and flyers she'd scribbled at 3 in the morning. And now Cole, who had been miles away billing hours at his law firm, was being handed the crown. Cole smirked, that condescending twist of his lips that had haunted her since childhood. "You did okay, Avery," he said, his voice dripping with false kindness. "But it's time for a real plan." He glanced at the marketing posters she'd pinned to the wall. "We'll start with new branding. Something professional." Avery's stomach clenched as he peeled back her flyers, tossing them aside like crumpled receipts. Those were her battle scars, the proof of her sacrifice, and yet in his hands they became nothing more than scraps. She wanted to scream, to demand they see her, to remind them she had saved the store while Cole polished his resume. But when she opened her mouth, the words stuck in her throat. Her parents' faces told her everything, Marcia glowing with pride, Richard nodding along, Cole basking in their approval. Nothing she said would matter. That night, she called her best friend from college, Jordan Pike. They'd met in a business class when he was the loud Texan with a big laugh, and she was the quiet Midwesterner with meticulous notes. Over greasy diner fries and coffee that tasted like burnt toast, Avery poured it all out. "They gave it to him," she whispered, staring at the vinyl booth as if it could swallow her whole. "I saved the store, Jordan. I canceled a $40,000 contract, and they handed it to him like I was just filling in until their real child showed up." Jordan shook his head, his expression equal parts pity and frustration. "They're blind, Avenue. You're killing yourself for people who don't care. You think if you work harder, they'll see you, but they won't." She stirred her coffee, eyes burning. "If I quit, if I walk away, it all falls apart. They'll have nothing." He leaned closer, his voice lowering but sharpening like a blade. "You've been the glue for so long you think it's your duty to keep them together. But glue doesn't get the credit. It just gets used until it's gone." His words lodged deep, but Avery wasn't ready to let go. She couldn't, not yet. She told herself that maybe if she worked harder, if she proved herself again, if she delivered something so perfect it couldn't be ignored, they'd finally acknowledge her worth. Back at the store, she kept grinding. Nights spent reorganizing shelves, refining ad slogans, updating displays while Cole sat in the office chair with his name freshly printed on the door. She watched him parade ideas he had stolen from her notebooks, heard her parents praise his vision while her own contribution shrank to a whisper. It was the same story written on a new page. Cole, the golden child, bathed in admiration. Avery, the shadow, laboring in silence, convincing herself her day of recognition would come. But shadows don't get applause. Shadows only grow longer in the presence of someone else's light. By the time Cole announced his engagement to Lindsay Carter, the store had been humming along for months. Customers crowded the aisles, and cash registers rang with the rhythm of revival. But for Avery, there was no credit, no gratitude, only another assignment this time, far more personal. "Avery will handle the wedding," Marcia declared one Sunday over roast beef at the dinner table. It wasn't a question, it wasn't even a request, it was an edict, delivered with the confidence of someone who believed her daughter existed solely to serve. Richard nodded along, as if his silence sealed the contract. Avery sat there, stunned. Her freelancing business was barely scraping by, invoices went unpaid for weeks, and she was chasing small contracts just to cover rent. Yet within days, she found herself signing deposit checks from her own savings. $10,000, gone in the blink of an eye, poured into securing the venue, reserving a band from Des Moines, ordering flowers from a modest local florist who promised charm on a budget. She did it not for Cole, but for the hope that maybe, just maybe, her family would finally see her effort as worthy. She thought that if she could make this wedding flawless, the narrative would change. She wouldn't just be the daughter who did okay. She'd be the sister who delivered. But Cole's vision for the wedding was never about love or intimacy. It was about spectacle. He wanted grandeur, a statement that Cedar Falls would talk about for decades. One morning, over coffee in the family kitchen, Cole scrolled through his phone with that same detached smirk. "We'll need a string quartet. There's a group in Omaha. And Lindsay saw these orchids in a magazine, rare ones, imported. Order those too." Avery tried to reason with him. "The budget's already stretched. I've put in everything I have. We can't—" Cole cut her off with a wave of his hand. "You're always cutting corners. This is my wedding. Make it happen." Marcia, sipping her coffee, chimed in without hesitation. He's right, Avery. Don't ruin this for him. Richard muttered from behind his newspaper, the words like gravel underfoot. It's his day. Don't be difficult. Their casual dismissal struck like a slap. Avery had already been working nights, haggling with vendors, chasing down contracts. She'd sacrificed her own projects to keep up with their endless demands. Still, it was never enough. The requests escalated. A celebrity DJ from Cleveland, caviar appetizers from a caterer whose menu made her stomach turn at the price, imported linens, an ice sculpture of swans mid-flight. Avery's savings bled dry, her calendar filled with vendor meetings, her mind a storm of spreadsheets and invoices. She slipped into bed at midnight with her laptop glowing against the dark, whispering calculations into the quiet. And yet, every time she surfaced with a solution, Cole moved the goalposts further. At a family lunch, she showed her mother a draft of the invitations. Joyce barely glanced at it before frowning. Careless, she said, tossing it aside as though Avery had made a spelling error on a grocery list. Cole chuckled. Typical Avery. It's stepped not they're off. The room erupted in easy laughter, everyone except Avery. She bit her tongue, teeth pressing hard enough to leave an ache in her jaw. She wanted to scream, to throw the invitations into their faces and demand they see the hours of work behind every letter, every font. Instead, she lowered her eyes and adjusted the seating chart. Jordan noticed the toll it was taking. At a coffee shop downtown, she vented, stirring her mug until the liquid went cold. He wants a custom ice sculpture now. As if $10,000 isn't already gone. Jordan leaned forward, his expression sharp. You're bending over backward for people who don't care. You're paying for a wedding that isn't yours. Avenue, stand up for yourself. But she couldn't, or rather, she wouldn't. She clung to the belief that if she delivered the impossible, if she created a spectacle worthy of their pride, then maybe, just maybe, she'd earn her place at the table. Nights blurred into weeks, and weeks into months. Avery secured a backup generator in case of power failure, paid extra deposits she couldn't afford, and checked every contract twice over. Her savings dwindled to nearly nothing, but she told herself it was worth it. If she could deliver Cole's perfect day, perhaps Marcia would smile at her. Perhaps Richard would nod with approval. Perhaps Cole would finally acknowledge her as more than a shadow. But hope, Avery would soon learn, is the most expensive currency of all. The night she walked out, Avery didn't crumble. She drove back to her apartment. A modest third-floor walk-up with peeling paint and a view of the gas station across the street. She set her purse on the counter, hands trembling not with fear but with clarity. They had told her to vanish. For once in her life, she was going to listen on her own terms. She opened her laptop, the blue glow washing across her face like stage lights on opening night. One by one, she dialed the numbers that would undo everything she had sacrificed. The caterer answered first, cheerful until Avery's voice cut steady through the line. Cancel the order. I want the deposit back. The woman hesitated, mentioned penalties, but Avery didn't flinch. Process the refund. Click. Next was the florist. No roses, no centerpieces. Refund me. The band was trickier. They'd already cashed the check, but Avery filed a chargeback, voice cold as steel. By noon, she had clawed back most of her $10,000. The transformation was surgical. A wedding meticulously built over months unraveled in hours. The paper contracts crumbled faster than her family's respect ever had. Avery leaned back in her chair, heart pounding not with regret but with something sharper, something like freedom. By afternoon, chaos bloomed at the venue. Guests arrived dressed to the nines only to find empty tables set without food. The bandstand sat silent, no strings, no drums, just echoes bouncing off the high-ceilinged hall. The florist's absence left the room barren, the air raw and unfinished. Lindsay stood in her gown, veil trembling as whispers rippled among relatives. Cole stormed between tables, his face blotched crimson, shouting at staff who shrugged helplessly. Marcia's voice rose above the din, shrill and panicked, while Richard's jaw tightened in stone-cold silence. A videographer, still on payroll, captured the collapse. His camera zoomed in on the empty buffet, the frantic bride, the groom's fury. What was meant to be a triumphant family spectacle became a slow-motion disaster, streamed live across Cedar Falls through Instagram stories and Facebook posts. By nightfall, half the town had watched the unraveling. Back at her apartment, Avery's phone buzzed with voicemails. Marcia's voice cracked with outrage. "Avery, what have you done? You've ruined everything." Richard's tone was colder, a blade wrapped in cloth. "You're a disgrace to this family." Cole didn't leave a message, he posted, instead. On the Cedar Falls neighborhood board, his words burned with venom. "My sister sabotaged my wedding. She's jealous, spiteful, and ruined the best day of my life." Replies poured in, a digital jury quick to convict. Neighbors Avery had grown up with faces she remembered from Christmas parades and high school basketball games typed their judgments with casual cruelty. Selfish, unhinged, ungrateful. Marcia even chimed in publicly, typing, "She's always been trouble." Avery scrolled through the feed, stomach twisting. For a moment, the old instinct returned. Defend yourself. Explain. Beg them to see the truth. But then she stopped. What was the point? They had written her story for her long ago. No amount of evidence could undo the role they had cast her in. Instead, she opened a new browser tab and typed apartments in Bend, Oregon. She had visited once on a whim, fallen in love with the mountains rising sharp against the sky, the rivers that shimmered like liquid glass. Bend promised something Iowa never had, a fresh start with no shadows clinging to her heels. She made calls to realtors, asked about rentals, packed boxes with quiet determination. That night, Jordan stopped by, phone in hand, his face grim. "They're trashing you online," he said, showing her Cole's post. "You okay?" Avery nodded, though her hands shook as she taped up another box. "I'm done with them." Jordan sat on the edge of her couch, watching her fold clothes into a suitcase. "You're stronger than they know," he said softly. For the first time, Avery believed him. By midnight, she had booked a one-way bus ticket to Bend. The wedding collapse wasn't her shame, it was theirs. They had demanded her disappearance, and she had delivered, but not in the way they expected. She wasn't going to fade quietly. She was going to leave Cedar Falls with her money, her dignity, and her power intact. The town could gossip, the posts could spread, but Avery was done being their shadow. She was ready to become her own story. The morning after the wedding imploded, Cedar Falls woke up buzzing like a hornet's nest. What should have been a triumphant headline in the local paper, "Lane Family Throws Wedding of the Year," was instead reduced to whispers at the gas station, murmurs in the church foyer, and a digital firestorm raging on community boards. Cole had taken his fury online. His post on the Cedar Falls neighborhood board was venom wrapped in self-pity. "My sister deliberately sabotaged my wedding. She's jealous, spiteful, and she ruined the best day of my life." The words bled across the screen like an indictment, and the comments multiplied within minutes. "She's always been trouble," one neighbor wrote. "The same man who used to smile at Avery when she bagged his groceries as a teenager." "Ungrateful child," another typed. "A woman Avery once helped carry boxes of canned goods to her car." And then came the one that stung the most. "We always knew Cole would go far, but Avery, well, not everyone can be a success." Marcia, her own mother, logged in and confirmed the narrative. "She's always been difficult, always making things harder than they need to be." Richard didn't post, but Avery knew his silence was agreement. The public trial was swift, and the verdict unanimous. Guilty of betrayal. Avery sat in her apartment, scrolling through the feed, her chest tight but her hands steady. For years she had begged them to see her, to notice the sacrifices she made, and now, here it was, their attention, their words cutting her down for the entire town to see. She didn't respond. She didn't argue. What would be the point? Cedar Falls had already chosen its villain. Instead, she turned inward, calculating her next move. Her freelance business, modest though it was, had a client list she could leverage. She reached out to a local marketing agency, one that had courted her before, and offered her portfolio, her contracts, her clients. Within days, they handed her a check for $25,000. It wasn't freedom. Not yet. But it was a lifeline. Then she made another call. Years earlier, when the store had been gasping for air, Avery had pulled $5,000 from her savings to keep it afloat. She had balanced the books, kept the lights on, patched the leaks. That money was still hers, tied up in a store that had become Cole's vanity project. She withdrew every cent. It felt like pulling oxygen from a fire. Without her investment and her management, the cracks she had plastered over began to split wide open. Suppliers, already wary, stopped extending credit. Shelves grew bare. The hum of the store that she had fought to resurrect began to fade. Her parents didn't know yet. They wouldn't until it was too late. By the end of the week, Avery was on the Greyhound website, purchasing a one-way ticket. Destination, Bend, Oregon. She remembered the scent of pine from her first visit, the way the Deschutes River glittered under a sky so wide it made you dizzy. Bend promised space room to breathe, to build, to exist outside the shadow of her family's disappointment. That night, Jordan stopped by again, a six-pack of cheap beer in his hands. He didn't lecture, didn't push. He just sat with her among the cardboard boxes as she folded her life into suitcases. "They don't deserve you," he said finally, his voice low. "They never did." Avery glanced at the glowing screen of her phone, Cole's post still climbing in comments. She could almost hear the hum of the town's gossip, the judgment dripping from every corner. And yet, for the first time, she didn't feel the urge to fight it. "They told me to vanish," she whispered, almost to herself. "So I will." Jordan nodded, clinking his bottle against hers. "Not as their failure, as your own beginning," and made Janu want to tear for the same. In the silence that followed, Avery realized that this was her trial, yes, but also her acquittal. Cedar Falls had convicted her in the court of public opinion, but she had already sentenced herself to freedom. By midnight, her ticket was booked, her bags half-packed, and her heart strangely steady. The bus ride west stretched for hours, cornfields giving way to rolling plains folding into the jagged spine of the Rockies. Avery pressed her forehead to the cool glass, watching the horizon tilt and shift, each mile carrying her further from Cedar Falls and deeper into the unknown. When she finally stepped off in Bend, Oregon, the air was thin, clean, and carried the scent of pine and mountain snow. It was a place that didn't know her name, and that was exactly what she needed. She rented a small apartment near the Deschutes River. Nothing glamorous, just a one-bedroom with peeling linoleum floors, a creaky heater, and a view of the mountains that made every imperfection worth it. On her first night, she ate takeout straight from the box, sitting cross-legged on the bare floor. The silence didn't ache like it had in Cedar Falls. Here, it felt like a promise. Starting over wasn't easy. Her freelance marketing business, though portable, was fragile. She pounded the pavement, dropping off flyers at local shops, emailing cold pitches, offering to design logos and draft ad campaigns for anyone willing to give her a chance. Some doors closed, some didn't answer, but a few cracked open. One morning, she wandered into Harper's Bakery, drawn by the smell of fresh bread spilling onto the street. Behind the counter stood Denise Harper, a woman in her 50s with flour streaking her apron and a laugh big enough to fill the room. "You look new around here," Denise said, sliding a free scone across the counter. "First one's on me." It was more than a pastry, it was an opening. They got to talking, and Avery shared just enough of her story to sound like a newcomer chasing her footing. Denise didn't pry. Instead, she introduced Avery to other shop owners around town. A bookstore that needed flyers, a brewery desperate for a rebrand, a hiking gear shop looking to modernize its website. Within 2 weeks, Avery had landed 3 steady clients. Her days began to find rhythm. She worked mornings in coffee shops with her laptop, afternoons walking the trails that crisscrossed Bend, and evenings sketching watercolor landscapes of the Cascades, an old hobby she had abandoned long ago in Iowa. The work was modest, about $3,000 a month, but it covered rent, groceries, and even left enough for small luxuries, a ticket to a local concert, a pair of boots sturdy enough for mountain trails. Jordan called every few weeks, his voice familiar and grounding. "Erie isn't the same without you," he said once, then laughed. "But you're killing it out there. Avenue, I can hear it." His encouragement reminded her of something she had forgotten. that she was more than the roles her family had cast her in, and Bend itself wrapped her in a kind of acceptance she'd never felt before. Denise became a steady anchor, slipping her muffins for fuel or nudging her toward community meetups. Other shop owners began to trust her, not because of her last name, but because of her work. Then came the big break. The Central Oregon Tourism Alliance needed a fresh campaign to draw visitors to the mountains, rivers, and breweries that dotted the region. Avery pitched her ideas with a confidence she barely recognized, weaving her years of scrappy freelancing into a polished proposal. To her shock, they said yes, a 6-month contract that doubled her income and gave her the stability she had been chasing for years. Late nights in Bend felt different from late nights in Cedar Falls. Back then, she had worked under the weight of invisibility, her worth always measured against Cole's shadow. Here, she worked with the hum of possibility in her chest, the knowledge that every ad copy she drafted, every logo she refined, was a brick in the foundation of her own life, not borrowed, not stolen, not given away. She climbed Smith Rock on weekends, the world unfurling below her in jagged ridges and endless sky. On those cliffs, lungs burning, Avery finally grasped what Jordan had tried to tell her. Glue doesn't get credit. Glue just holds things together until it disappears. And she was done disappearing. For the first time, Avery wasn't bending to anyone else's expectations. She was bending to her own will, her own rhythm, her own strength. And in that bending, she refused to break. Months slipped by in Bend, and the past began to feel like someone else's story. Avery's apartment filled with little signs of permanence, plants lining the windowsill, a rug from a local market, books stacked haphazardly by the couch. She laughed more easily now, often at Harper's Bakery over mugs of coffee, while Denise regaled her with tales of rebuilding life after divorce. It was here, in this quiet mountain town, that Avery discovered peace wasn't something handed to her. It was something she built, piece by piece. Then one morning, an envelope arrived. The handwriting was unmistakable, shaky but familiar. Marcia. Inside, the words begged and manipulated all at once. Her mother claimed illness, pleaded for Avery to return, to help rebuild the family after the grocery store's bankruptcy and Cole's unraveling reputation. It was heavy with guilt, painting Avery not as a daughter but as a missing piece of their survival. For a moment, Avery faltered. The instinct to rush back, to rescue them again, tugged at her like an old habit. She showed the letter to Denise, who read it, snorted, and tossed it onto the counter. "This smells like manipulation," she said, blunt but kind. "People don't change just because they're desperate." Jordan echoed the same when she called him. "They're dragging you back into the role you fought to escape. Don't fall for it." That night, Avery sat at her desk with pen and paper. Her reply was short, final. "I wish you well, but I am not coming back." She mailed it the next morning and blocked every number tied to Cedar Falls. The silence that followed was different this time. It wasn't hollow. It was freedom. In Bend, Avery's work flourished. Her tourism campaign launched to rave reviews, doubling foot traffic for local businesses. Clients thanked her, friends trusted her, and for the first time, she wasn't living for scraps of approval. She hiked trails at sunrise, painted mountain ridges at sunset, and filled her days with the kind of life she had once thought belonged only to others. The Cascade Range became her horizon, endless and wild. Standing there one morning, brush in hand, she smiled, not because her family finally saw her, but because she no longer needed them to. Her life was hers now, entirely, fiercely, finally.